Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for today's webinar, 5 must-have hyperconverged features you can't afford to ignore. My name is Stacy Buckland, and I'm the Marketing Programs Manager here at Pivot3, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that we will be recording today's webinar. We'll be sending out links to the recording and the slide deck tomorrow, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. We've also included some digital handouts to provide more info on today's topic. You can download those from the handouts pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please type them into the question box. We'll be addressing your questions at the end of the webinar. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. We're joined today by Krista Maycumber, a Senior Analyst at Technology Business Research. She's a leading contributor to TBR's syndicated program and custom research and coverage on IT infrastructure, including servers, storage, data center networking, infrastructure management, and end-user productivity solutions. Krista uses her business and marketing expertise to assess loyalty, perception, and buying behaviors as they pertain to customers and partners. We're also joined today by Bruce Milne, Chief Marketing Officer at Pivot3. Bruce is a visionary technology executive with over 20 years of marketing and products experience. Over the course of his career, he has helped innovative software companies establish their vision and execute their go-to-market strategy. We're happy to have both Krista and Bruce joining us today. So now I'll go ahead and turn things over to Krista to get us started.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Stacy, and indeed, welcome to all of our attendees today. Thank you very much for joining us. What we'd like to do on the next slide during the discussion today, you'll see just a very quick agenda here. First, I'll kick off the stage in terms of really what we're seeing in the hyperconverged platforms market, some of the evolution and really the value that customers are receiving by migrating to the platforms. Then I'll turn the call over to Bruce to walk us through Pivot3's unique platform and particular differentiation in the space. Then I will give some quick few closing remarks before we take your questions. And so without further ado, if we could proceed to the next slide and jump right in. The findings that I'll be sharing with you today are primarily based around TBR's Hyperconverged Platforms customer research. We are in the field twice a year, serving Hyperconverged Platforms customers in the U.S. We speak with more than 400 customers every year around a whole range of their adoption patterns. We speak with them about some of the particular drivers and inhibitors behind their adoption of Hyperconverged Platforms, as well as a number of the challenges that they're facing with legacy infrastructure that's encouraging them to migrate to such a radically different architecture. And so what we see consistently through this research, and these findings are based on our most recent study that we published at the end of June of this year, is that customers are increasingly turning to hyperconverged platforms, and they're doing so to be able to serve their evolving application needs more effectively than they can with legacy infrastructure. And we're seeing that they're doing so overall to success. We're seeing that momentum in terms of the workloads that customers are migrating to hyperconverged platforms, as well as what they're intending to spend on hyperconverged infrastructure, as well as their satisfaction with the technology just continues to rise across the conversations that we have with customers and the deliverables that we produce into the market. And we are seeing that this is true across a wide range of customer sizes, so not just within SMB environments, but certainly within the mid-market and larger enterprises as well. And we are saying that this is also true across a range of industries as well. And so if we could please proceed one slide, we'll take a look in a little more detail around some of the trends that we're seeing in the data center that are encouraging customers to begin migrating to hyperconverged infrastructure. We're seeing that in today's business environment, the data center can really no longer serve as the cost center that it has served as for many, many years now. We are seeing that the data center is steadily emerging as a key driver of business outcomes for customers. And so increasingly, what do those outcomes look like for customers today? Well, we're seeing that in today's business environments, customers need to move more quickly. They need to be able to respond almost in real time to dynamics in terms of any requirements and demand patterns from their end customers. we're seeing that customers are becoming overwhelmed with an influx of data from social media, mobile devices, things like this, that they need to not only store, but they also are looking to be able to leverage, perform analytics on this data to be able to receive new business insights and improve their decision making. These are just a couple of examples. And so in this environment, traditional approaches to IT infrastructure, the silos of server, storage, and networking infrastructure, and also the silos of the teams that run this infrastructure. These are no longer sufficient. We're also seeing that the silos that have existed historically between IT and business are no longer are increasingly weigh on the company's ability to be able to achieve these new outcomes as well. And so in this environment, we're seeing that data centers that are increasingly converged, data centers that are more oriented for service delivery, and data centers that have drastically improved simplicity and efficiency, especially at the storage layer. These are the kinds of infrastructure and architectures that customers require today. And for the underlying infrastructure itself, especially at the hardware layer, we're seeing that commoditization is occurring. We're seeing that pricing pressures, prices continue to be lowered. And we're seeing this because technologies, and in particular hyperconverged platforms, are steadily emerging. We're seeing that hyperconverged platforms is increasingly providing customers with an on-ramp to more of a software-mediated data center that does provide this agility that customers require. It provides that on-ramp, and an on-ramp that's faster and more simple. And on the next slide, I will share some findings with you that really shows why we're looking at hyperconverged infrastructure as a game changer today. I mentioned that we talk with more than 400 customers per year, and these are buyers of hyperconverged platforms. And what we do is we speak with not only decision makers that sit within IT itself, more of the traditional decision makers, but we also speak with line of business decision makers as well. These respondents also needed to have a direct influence over the purchase of the hyperconverged platform. And that is because we wanted to make sure that we are reflecting this, these steps closer that IT and line of business are taking, and this need from IT to be able to serve these business requirements. And what we find when we speak with both of these camps of respondents is that there are a number of commonalities in terms of the drivers that are influencing their decision to migrate to hyperconverged infrastructure. Some of the most common drivers, the feedback that we receive overwhelmingly, is the need to reduce those costs and those complexities of the traditional infrastructure just continue to come back, and again, really very strongly in this feedback. We're also seeing that there is a strong need to be able to boost the performance and the responsiveness of the infrastructure, and that is primarily to be able to better support the productivity of the business itself. So taking a look a little more specifically, we see that what happens is this comes back in terms of forming a mixture of drivers across business, cost, and IT attributes that are influencing customers' decisions to migrate. When we asked customers about some of the top reasons for investing in hyperconverged platforms, we found that investing to increase cost efficiencies, as well as to refresh infrastructure that is aging and really drive the efficiency of that underlying infrastructure to improve the effectiveness of how the business runs. That, again, just came back as among the leading reasons that customers are moving to hyperconverged platforms. In a fairly similar vein, when we ask customers around the key challenges that they are encountering with legacy infrastructure that drove their deployment of hyperconverged platforms, we found that cost of infrastructure, again, did appear across both camps, but also what we saw was that the need for more effective capabilities in areas like backup and management. We spoke on the previous slide around some of the challenges that customers are encountering as their data environments grow and as they need to be able to leverage this infrastructure as well. So certainly those kind of future functionalities are, customers are finding value there as well. But another thing that emerged is the need to serve those specific line of business and workload needs. You can see these here on the slide. And that really goes back to when you combine these drivers, it really goes back to the costs and complexities of traditional infrastructure really becoming out of hand and inhibiting IT's ability to be able to serve these requirements. And as I touched on, we are seeing that customers are, these are the drivers, and we are seeing that customers are finding value as they migrate. I mentioned that we see building satisfaction, the average satisfaction across these attributes just continues to expand with every set of research we produce. And we also see that a very large portion of customers indicate to us that they would recommend migrating to Hyperconverged to a peer, and that's predominantly based on the agility, the flexibility that we've spoken about today. On the next slide, I wanted to share a few more insights around some of the major cost and purchase attributes that are influencing customers' decisions to migrate to hyperconverged platforms. We've talked a little bit so far today about storage. And this also came back when we asked customers about the cost and purchase attributes that are influencing their migrations. As you can see here on the slide, storage cost savings most substantially influenced, from a cost and purchase perspective, customers' migrations. We also found that across these attributes reflected here, customers on average were most satisfied with storage cost savings as well. So this really indicates, again, that customers are turning to hyperconverged platforms to be able to improve the cost structure of their storage environments, and that they are finding value. The scalability path was also highly substantially influential. You can see it was the second most influential attribute, and that goes back to that need for greater agility that we discussed earlier today. And both of these tie in, kind of building on this concept of storage, these both tie into the high levels of cost and complexity that customers have endured historically with their storage environments, and just how these increasingly become a barrier to outcomes as customers do need to store and leverage more information. And this actually came back as well when we spoke with customers around the kinds of workloads that they're migrating to hyperconverged platforms. We found that customers are migrating a range of workloads to hyperconverged platforms, but actually more data-centric workloads, things like BI and analytics for data mining, predictive analytics, these workloads tend to be common influencers and targets for migration to hyperconverged platforms, and that actually does happen consistently within this research. And we do believe that it is, again, because of those high levels of cost and complexity within the storage environment. On the next slide, so again, this is very good news for customers that they are seeing the value, but there are actually a number of challenges that we're seeing emerge within the hyperconverged platform space for customers to, we believe, bear in mind as they're proceeding to select the hyperconverged vendor that they work with. The first that I wanted to mention is actually around pricing and ongoing cost savings. We've talked about this as an influencer and a reason why customers are turning to hyperconverged platforms, but the feedback that we receive from customers indicates that some pain points actually do remain. We asked customers in our survey around some of features that they would require, some either enhanced or added features that they would be looking for to ensure a future purchase of a hyperconverged platform. And we found that actually lower upfront prices was the top feature noted by customers to ensure future adoption. One other data point I wanted to point out as well, on the prior slide, and we don't necessarily have to go back, but CapEx and OpEx savings was actually the least influential cost and purchase attribute noted by customers on average, driving their decision to migrate to hyperconverged platforms. So what we believe is happening here is that the bar is set very high from customers for cost savings because they have such a tremendous need for this. And I think that some work remains for many vendors in the hyperconverged space to be able to work with their customers more from the standpoint of helping them to be able to envision and plan for the TCO of their hyperconverged infrastructure for their particular workloads, and really what kinds of cost savings they can experience over time. I think that there may be some additional CapEx and OpEx pieces that are emerging for customers as they do broaden their hyperconverged deployments, which we did mention towards the start of the call is certainly happening today. And building from that concept, the second challenge that you'll see here on the slide is pertaining to this concept of customers beginning to scale out their hyperconverged platforms. And one pain point that emerged from our research is that when we spoke with customers around some of the challenges that they encountered during their process of migrating to hyperconverged, complex integration with existing infrastructure, as well as the time and resource investment that was required, were two of the leading challenges that customers noted they encountered. And I think that this is certainly something for customers to keep in mind as they're planning to migrate a greater range of workloads, more business-critical workloads to hyperconverged platforms. This is certainly, I think, a major pain point that is potentially emerging in the industry as customers begin to leverage the platform more for broader workload consolidation. One other threat, again, further building on this concept of customers building out their hyperconverged infrastructures, is around scalability. 28% of customers also indicated that they required enhanced scalability for a future purchase. And I know that we discussed this on the previous slide as an influencer behind customers' migrations, but I do believe this shows that the bar is set very high by customers, and although most of the functionality provided in the industry may be adequate, there are some ongoing requirements that remain unsatisfied, and I think that this is really an area to focus on for customers as they're evaluating their purchases. And the final thread I wanted to touch on before I turn the call over to Bruce to share with you more on Pivot3's platform is also around the deployment process. We asked customers around various attributes of the deployment process, things like configuration, optimization, and we asked them around which pieces of the deployment process took longer for hyperconverged than traditional infrastructure. And what we found in our June research of this year is that a greater percentage of mid-market customers in particular are experiencing more greater time to deployment for these various attributes for hyperconverged infrastructure. So again, I think this really shows that there are some pain points that are emerging for customers as they further build out their infrastructure. And with that, on the next slide, I would like to turn the call over to Bruce to walk you through Pivot3's platform and some of the value that Pivot3 is bringing to the market.
Thanks, Krista. And this is some terrific research that I think really helps prospects and customers think more expansively about hyperconvergence and how it's going to affect their environments. And we talk to an awful lot of customers and prospects in the run of a day, and you know what I hear over and over again is that the expectations from IT organizations inside their overall businesses are expanding significantly. You know, traditionally, there's obviously been a demand for performance and availability that's largely informed these days by customers or end users' experience with mobile devices and the always-on economy, you know, the applications that are always available. So enterprise applications are expected to be available in that same sort of context. And so service levels, expectations of service levels are increasing, expectations of performance and sub-second response times are increasing. That's putting a lot of stress on IT. But increasingly, we're also seeing demand for agility and better economics, which are competing factors influencing IT's decisions as well, which I think ties back, Krista, to what your research found around price, integration, the ability to integrate with existing systems quickly and adapt quickly as the business needs change. So we're hearing similar things from prospects and customers when we talk to them. This creates a whole new set of dynamics, though, for IT because the pace of change is accelerating. The new business opportunities that derive from IT or that require IT support are increasing, and so as a consequence, IT has to really retool and understand how to adapt their business to those new requirements, those new dynamics. And so we're seeing the interest in hyperconvergence really driven by two competing factors. One is the simplicity of the deployment and the architecture, how to easily deploy, integrate, adapt this to new business services, but then be able to manage it more effectively and reduce the amount of time that people need to spend on managing that IT so they can further align with the lines of business and understand their requirements better. On the other hand is the economics. If you build these out, there are lots of contributing factors to this, right? Scalability, cost of ownership, cost of acquisition, clearly all tied to the economic side of the equation. The notion of sustainable and reliable infrastructure, fewer vendors to work with, simplicity of deployment, these are all the simplicity factors. So we see these two factors really competing for IT's time and attention, but really driving a lot of the interest in hyperconvergence, because this is really the promise of virtualizing your data center to the point where it's a software-defined data center, and that's ultimately the goal. Now, Pivot3 is an independent infrastructure solution company. We're based in Austin, Texas, with operations around the world, and we are widely known. For the last decade, we've been widely known as the vendor that provides the infrastructure that supports the largest hyperconverged deployments in the marketplace today. We'll talk a little bit about that. We are number one in storage efficiency by multiple factors. So where in many cases you should expect to get 33 to 50% utilization, usable space out of any storage infrastructure that you purchase, with Pivot3 that can be as much as 94% utilization, which is a significant impact on your cost of ownership and your cost of acquisition of new solutions. And our performance to footprint ratio is twice the closest competitor. So we are without question, the number one performer of any hyperconverged solution out there. And that is due in large part to our history of supporting large-scale data ingestion and management type use cases. Even before there was a category called hyperconvergence, that was really our stock and trade. We've built a platform and an infrastructure to support those types of deployments, which is increasingly what we're seeing in our customers' situations where they're ingesting huge amounts of data, whether it's the Internet of Things or other dynamics that are driving that data ingestion. Our customers are doing more with data, more analytics on those data assets, and they need more and more infrastructure to support that, but they need it to be efficient and be adaptable at the same time. And we've been widely recognized for this visionary solution, for our strong current offering, the strategy of where we're taking the hyperconverged market. We are continuing to deliver innovation like quality of service and dynamic provisioning of resources, so you can host more and more applications on the same converged infrastructure and get more use out of that, and more saturation and more density out of that same infrastructure. And we have a very strong offering in terms of scalability in sharing resources across the pool of assets that you've developed. That is, again, a significant advantage of Pivot3 and reflected in many, many analyst reviews that you can go and read in the broader market. So the key criteria that we see customers looking for when they are evaluating hyperconverged solutions. The first one, this lines up very closely with the issues I think that Krista, you highlighted in your research. One is that it be simple to set up and manage, and that the infrastructure integrations with our existing platforms are simple, right? So they're pre-configured or simple to integrate and take advantage of, embrace, and extend the solutions we already have in place. The second, that it be scalable, modular, and flexible enough so that it deploys seamlessly into my data center, but can expand as my business expands. So you can start small and grow. You can add either vertical capacity or horizontal capacity. It can scale up or scale out, and provides seamless access to your data regardless of where it resides in the infrastructure. We're also seeing customers ask for a broader set of deployment choices. One of the key advantages to most of the solutions in the market for hyperconvergence, save a couple, is that it uses off-the-shelf components from multiple platform vendors like Dell, Lenovo, Cisco, and so on. So you can negotiate your very best rate on pretty much off-the-shelf hardware as opposed to having to buy proprietary, more expensive infrastructure that requires more cost of ownership, more cost of acquisition. So the choice of deployment options and form factors for Pivot3 is unparalleled, so we spend a lot of time focusing on providing more customer choice for our customers, especially when you get into unique form factors and so forth. We do a lot of that kind of work. And this is one of the issues I think that was also brought up by you, Krista, or brought up in your research, highlighted in the research, was being simple to deploy and easy to integrate. We provide prescriptive solutions out of the box. We've been doing this a long time. We have a lot of expertise in this area, so we've actually baked that expertise into the user interface, into the solutions, so that out of the box customers can, for instance, assign business priority to workloads, whether it's mission critical, business critical, or normal priority. And those preset policies are actually built into the product. So that saves the customer the difficulty and the extra complexity of having to go and define those things. They're configurable, but they're set out of the box and prescriptive. And then, of course, one of the key criteria, once again, for hyperconvergence is economic. There needs to be capital expenditure savings and operating expenditure savings, the initial cost of acquisition, and the ongoing maintenance and management. So Pivot3 does a lot in these areas. One of those is, in terms of simplicity and flexibility, is taking the what would normally be stranded resources on different devices in your hyperconverged infrastructure and combines them into a pooled set of resources where it combines the RAM cache, the storage capacity, all into a pool that can be utilized by multiple applications. What that means is that all the assets that you purchase are available to the broader set of applications that you host on this infrastructure, and you don't have stranded resources in one place that can't be used by an application in another. That's a critical component to effective hyperconvergence and effectively utilizing the resources that you stand up in your data center. Now, in terms of better economics, one of the things that we do particularly well is deliver better storage efficiency. I mentioned 94% utilization of your assets. Most hyperconvergence and traditional approaches to managing data will do basic replication in order to create backup and recovery scenarios, and that is pretty poor utilization of your storage. What it means is that if you purchase 1,000 terabytes, you only get 360 terabytes usable, and it's also a CPU hog and consumes a lot of resources to manage the processing of the data as you do that replication. What we do is take an arithmetic derivation of the data and stripe it across all the nodes or the spindles that you have in your infrastructure, so that we can very quickly rebuild all the data from that arithmetic derivation. It's a very efficient and elegant solution. It's in its 7th generation. Actually, we're rolling out the 8th generation now. So it's very efficient. It doesn't use up very much overhead at all. You can see that as your deployment grows, it can actually decrease to as much as 6% overhead tax, if you will, on your infrastructure to be able to support this erasure coding model of doing data replication. So very efficient, much better economics, reduces, of course, the amount of infrastructure you need to buy to meet your security and risk policies that your business has put in place in terms of data protection and management. Now, what you'll also find as you get into hyperconvergence is that the applications that you want to deploy in this infrastructure present a whole spectrum of needs. They might be very I/O intensive, or you might have low intensity applications where there's low intensity processing and storage. They're pretty inert applications. They come on once in a while, not a ton of data. But in other cases, you get very process intensive applications that might not have a huge demand on storage, but they are lots of process required, like high density graphics in a virtual desktop environment or analytics type applications. And in some cases, you got intensive processing and high storage performance requirements, like a virtual desktop application that includes interactive components like trading, stock market trading. So the applications you want to deploy will run the gamut in terms of their needs from the infrastructure. You need configurability, adaptability, agility to be able to deploy the types of infrastructure that you need to support these different applications, but all under the same management framework and paradigm. Otherwise, it gets more complex, it gets more difficult to manage, and ultimately that it presents costs. So what Pivot3 does is allow you to mix workloads, deploy the type of device you want into the array, prioritize the applications that matter most using those policies I mentioned earlier, bring all of that under management under a single pane of glass, and it reduces the silos of infrastructure that you need in order to support all these different types of applications. So you can bring it all under management in a single framework, and then you can expand that up as your capacity requirements grow, or you can expand it out as your storage and data management requirements grow. And once again, out of the box, we prescribe best practices for supporting these different types of applications so that the mission critical ones get the resources they need in order for you to guarantee the performance and availability of those applications, right? You have an SLA, a service level agreement for specific applications or business services. You can promise that to your end users, even if that comes at the expense of lower priority applications, which might be resource hogs, but will get automatically constrained when resources are required to support the SLAs of those top priority applications. And that is really, out of the box, a unique characteristic of Pivot3's offerings, that we allow you to do that on the same infrastructure. It allows you, with confidence and with peace of mind, to deploy and co-locate multiple types of applications on the same infrastructure without worrying that low priority but high bandwidth requirement applications, without worrying that those will consume all the resources that your high priority business critical applications need. Now, if you compare the results of a platform like Pivot3 to traditional deployments, we'll use VDI, virtual desktops, as an example here, you'll see there's a significant cost advantage in deploying hyperconvergence to support an application like VDI. In this case, 400 desktops. In a traditional model, it would be about $350 per desktop to manage. In a Pivot3 scenario, that would be about $200 per desktop to manage. So a significant cost savings. What's really important, though, is you actually get more performance under that same scenario. So you're getting more throughput, more performance, more availability of that application, even at a lower cost. So hyperconvergence, the way we deliver it, provides some significant, not only cost of ownership advantages, but some performance advantages as well. But what's really interesting is when you compare this to other HCI vendors in the marketplace, you can see that Pivot3's efficiency actually increases as the deployment grows. So over 3 years, we see, for a 400 desktop solution, you get a 22% lower cost of ownership. But as that deployment grows to 600 over the same 3-year period, the cost of ownership actually decreases even more. So because of the storage efficiency, because of the prescriptive nature and the ability to deploy more and more applications on the same infrastructure and manage their priority, we actually lower your cost of ownership, and that is the gift that keeps on giving, and it keeps improving over time as your deployment grows. And regardless of how many tests get applied against Pivot3, in comparison to the other vendors in the marketplace, we see significant advantages on pretty much every front, whether it's throughput to the footprint of the infrastructure that you deploy, whether it's the resilience of the applications. We're running multi-petabyte applications in many, many environments for customers where they haven't lost a byte of data, even through drive failures and so forth. The way we've built the system is really to support resilient, highly scalable, highly performing applications with the agility to be able to adapt as new business requirements introduced, the ability to add new resources as your capacity requirements increase, scale linearly and predictably without a reduction in availability or support, without an increase in the overhead required to manage that infrastructure, and ultimately to deliver the lower cost of ownership that is absolutely required to justify even moving to a hyperconverged infrastructure in the first place. And we actually have calculators to this effect that allow you to do some of the math that will affect your specific business. So if you go to pivot3.com, you'll find that there's some calculators there that allow you to see how we calculate cost of ownership and how you can reduce your own in your scenario. And I think the key dynamic here in really gaining the advantage from hyperconvergence that it promises, whether it's the economics or the simplicity, is to be able to co-locate multiple applications on the same infrastructure, reduce the amount of infrastructure you need on the raised floor in your data center and the ping power pipe that you require to support all that, and be able to differentiate between the workloads so that the most important ones get the resources they need to meet the SLAs, even if that's at the expense, temporary expense, of some of the lower priority applications. And what that really means is you can assign business priority to workloads, focus on workloads that drive business outcomes, and not focus on the infrastructure so much, which is really what a lot of IT teams are reporting to us as their primary goal, is to be more agile and more responsive to the line of business. We're doing this for a lot of really demanding customers around the world. Of course, we've been around for a number of years. We have over 2,200 customers that we're supporting. We have over 16,000 devices up and running today. If a drive demonstrates that it's about to fail, a hard drive, and these are like bearings in a car, they wear out over time. As they start to fail, they demonstrate certain behaviors that we identify, and we will notify, the application will notify Pivot3, and we will notify the customer and let them know their drive is failing. At the same time, the system will vacate that drive and make sure that all the data is safely ensconced someplace else, and then notify that it's okay to remove the drive. You can replace the drive that we send you, and the data gets populated back to that drive, and everything moves on according to plan. You can actually have 5 concurrent drive failures in a normal array with Pivot3 and suffer minimal disruption of your business continuity. In fact, you might see a 10 to 15% degradation in the overall performance with 5 drives failing. That's remarkable and amazing that you can continue your business even as you're maintaining and managing it that way with no unplanned downtime. And we see this kind of requirement in some of these demanding environments around the world. 31 of the largest public companies, for instance, aerospace and defense companies. Mission criticality takes on a whole new meaning when you're working with folks like this. And so our platform has really evolved and been designed, purpose-built to support these types of demanding environments, whether it's local or distributed around the world. So with that, Krista, let me pass it back to you, and we'll take some questions at the end.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Bruce. I think that you've really recapped in a very powerful way Pivot3's differentiation and how that lines up with some of the challenges that we're seeing emerging in the hyperconverged space. And if you could just move ahead one slide. Hopefully we've really set the stage today around some of the value that customers are receiving by migrating to hyperconverged platforms. And that's not just from an IT or from a cost perspective, but that's really also from a business perspective. We're finding that, in fact, as customers tend to have hyperconverged platforms in their environments, really gain some experience with the technology, the business outcomes that they're able to achieve, that newfound agility is very palpable, very resonant, and it's encouraging these early adopters to broaden their adoption plans. Now, as a result of this, naturally, hyperconverged, we do believe, will continue to disrupt the data center, displacing, as we've talked about today, legacy standalone infrastructure, also limiting some opportunities to a degree for more traditional converged systems as well that are not fully virtualized or software-defined as hyperconverged platforms are. So as a result, naturally, the marketplace from a vendor perspective will remain very crowded, very competitive. And I think with these two dynamics, it's pretty clear that it's very important for customers to carefully select the vendor that they work with, because this certainly can have a very substantial impact on their productivity and really their competitiveness in the marketplace moving forward. And with that, I would like to turn the call over to Stacy to address some questions that I'm sure we have lined up in the queue here.
Thanks, Krista, and thank you, Bruce. That was a great presentation, and we do have a lot of audience interest. So we'll do our best to get to all of these questions. If we aren't able to get to your question, then we will certainly respond to you after the event. This first question I'm going to go ahead and direct to Bruce. And the question is, can Pivot3 integrate with my existing legacy infrastructure, or do I need to replace it?
That's a great question, and we've actually designed our platform to integrate very seamlessly with your existing infrastructure, especially storage area networks. They still have a purpose. A lot of hyperconverged vendors will denigrate storage area networks. They are expensive, they are proprietary, but in some cases they're a good fit for a use case or an application. So we've designed our platform to integrate nicely with that. Over time, if you want to migrate that data to hyperconvergence, terrific, but otherwise you can continue to integrate with it. In fact, we did an acquisition earlier this year of next-gen storage and rolled out some joint products very, very quickly after that acquisition. And part of that platform, that set of offerings, is effectively a storage area network attached to a hyperconverged array. So we do this a lot. We see a lot of different types of configurations in customer scenarios, and we've designed our platform to accommodate that nicely.
Perfect. Krista, this one is for you. So you called out VDI as an example workload during the presentation. Are there other workloads that are ideal to be deployed on hyperconverged platforms?
Sure, thank you, Stacy, and that is a great question. And as I mentioned, we do talk with customers. We ask them a range of questions, not only which workloads prompted the purchase of their hyperconverged platforms, but also which workloads are they targeting to migrate and how satisfied they are with the performance of their workload. And that's the particular question that I would like to focus on in terms of that satisfaction. So we are seeing some of the early use cases for hyperconverged platforms, VDI, DevOps, development and testing. These are among the higher satisfied workloads in addition to database processing, actually. And so I think that that really shows, that database piece in particular shows that customers are moving from some of these point deployments for some of these silos of these virtualized workloads into really some business critical implementations as well. And another interesting thing is that when we asked customers which workloads they are not currently deploying in hyperconverged platforms but they would like to deploy, we are seeing that actually business processing, and in particular ERP, was the most commonly cited workload. It was noted by 21% of respondents. So I think that that really shows that hyperconverged platforms are being proven from the perspective of their ability to being able to support these key business processes from the standpoint of performance, reliability, capacity, and really moving into some of these key implementations. And I think that that's really telling, because not only are customers evaluating these platforms pretty extensively up front based on the feedback that we're receiving, but I think we're also hitting a point in the marketplace in which customers, the early adopters of these technologies, are having them in their environments for long enough, and they're really being able to test out these platforms with their particular workloads in their particular environment specifically. Bruce, I'm not sure how that lines up with what Pivot3 is seeing. If you have anything that you'd like to add.
Yeah, we're seeing an interesting evolution in the hyperconverged space, Krista, where traditionally it was customers were deploying VDI because it was easily ring-fenced in the data center. It was an easy way to do a proof of concept to test this new notion of hyperconvergence. They might have experience with converged infrastructure, like a Cisco UCS type deployment, where the storage is managed quite separately from the processing memory networking, or they might have experience with traditional infrastructure, but maybe not HCI. And so we've seen VDI be a good test bed for that. But very, very quickly, we saw customers gain confidence in the resilience and the reliability of the applications, at least in our case, and then expand very quickly to other use cases. So, they were basically saying, listen, this works for VDI. We've been able to train our people very quickly. Our expertise is developed fast. We don't need a lot of expertise to manage this infrastructure now. And so we want to realize that simplicity in those economics with other use cases as well. So we've seen things like BCDR, so business continuity disaster recovery. Clearly the idea of rolling out a super hyper-converged infrastructure to remote office and branch office locations is a very, very common use case now. We're seeing, interestingly, the emergence of large-scale data management type applications and the analytics on top of that, whether it's database, RDBMS type applications, Internet of Things, big data, data lake type applications with analytics applied to that, things that heretofore you wouldn't have expected to see hyperconvergent take on, because processing and large scale wasn't really one of the hallmarks of hyperconvergence early in the market. Pivot3, of course, is focused on making that the case. So our solutions support large-scale implementations for storage, capture and management and storage of data, and also large-scale, high-intensity processing applications, and supporting all of those in the same infrastructure. So we see customers spending, 5 to 6 times as much on hyperconvergence as they were when they were doing a single application, because they're seeing such enormous advantages in other use cases as well.
Okay, thanks, guys. This one is for Krista. And Krista, based on your research, how suitable is hyperconvergence for cloud hosting?
Sure, and thank you. That's also a great question. And we did ask customers how they're using their hyperconverged platforms in terms of are they using it to support a private cloud implementation or simply sort of a refresh of legacy infrastructure. And as of our June study, 55% of the respondents that we spoke with were using their hyperconverged platform to support a private cloud implementation in some way, shape, or form. And I think that that percentage will only increase moving forward. And that really goes back to the cost effectiveness, the agility that we've spoken about a lot so far today. And those are really the hallmarks of what we believe customers are seeking as they turn to cloud service delivery. So but now hyperconverged platforms, we believe, are emerging as a way for customers to be able to achieve some of those attributes, but at the same time keep their workloads on premises instead of migrating off to a service delivery because of the not only the turnkey nature of many of the appliances, but also really the fully software-defined nature. And I know I spoke to earlier during the discussion today, hyperconverged platforms effectively being a really simplified and cost-effective on-ramp to that software-defined environment for customers. So I think, again, that's really what's driving some of these migrations to private cloud leveraging hyperconverged. So I would absolutely stay tuned for that moving forward in terms of I would expect that to become much more common in the marketplace today. And I also would expect that vendors will, moving forward, begin to invest as well in integrations with public cloud services as well to have some of those cloud bursting capabilities and other things like that as needed.
Okay. Bruce, can you speak to how the cost of Pivot3 compares to other HCI vendors?
Yeah, there's a lot of competitive pressure in the HCI world to keep the costs pretty consistent. Now, you have to take into account the cost of ownership as well as the acquisition cost. So, we do see that we have a specific or a significant advantage with Pivot3 where even if the costs are commensurate with the competition, we tend to be within 10 to 15% of each other if you talk to any of the competitors. But the overall cost of ownership reduces significantly because you have to buy less of Pivot3 in order to achieve the same outcomes. With the higher throughput, the more processing for the same footprint, with the ability to support, for instance, more VDI desktops. You just need less of it, about 30% decrease in cost of ownership over comparables in market. Some vendors will give the hyperconverged solution away to customers who might be customers of their broader portfolio. I would caution customers to look very carefully at the overall cost of ownership of that solution. Nothing free is truly free, of course, so evaluate very closely whether it meets your needs and can grow with your business. There tends to be a large tax on solutions like that.
Okay. I think this might tie into what you were just talking about. Someone has said, I need to scale storage but not compute. Does Pivot3 allow you to scale these separately?
Yes, that's a great question. You can scale them separately. You can add storage. You can add processing as required depending on what your needs are. So you can scale out, scale up, add as much storage as you need. We can support enormous arrays. In fact, in situations where you need very little processing but huge amounts of storage like video surveillance data capture, we have applications that are storing 6, 10 terabytes under management without a problem.
Perfect. Krista, this question's for you. And the question is, what sort of feedback are you receiving about support provided by pure-play HCI vendors like Pivot3?
Absolutely, and that's actually, I'm glad the question was brought up because that's an important area to look at. We do find that 90% of customers, the hyperconverged customers that we speak with, purchase add-on services, and that goes back to the points that Bruce was making around some of the initial unfamiliarity with the architecture compared to traditional infrastructure. So we are seeing that, a range of vendors, the pure-play vendors such as a Pivot3, as well as some of the vendors such as an HPE that also have that legacy infrastructure business, they're investing to build out some of the support capabilities. But in particular, when we talk to Pivot3 customers, and I know I've spoken a lot to our customer research today, and in terms of the survey-based results that I've been referencing, We also do conduct in-depth interviews with customers of a select number of vendors, and actually Pivot3 was one of them in the most recent deliverable. And when we spoke with Pivot3 customers, what we found was that Pivot3 is a really great example of attracting customers initially on things like scalability, cost effectiveness, for point workloads, VDI, video surveillance, some of the things that we've spoken to today. But as that initial value becomes established, then customers are beginning to expand out their deployments. And in addition to the capabilities of the technology today, things like disaster recovery, optimized storage environment that we've spoken with, we do find as well that the services, so things like installation, migration, ongoing management, were also significant influencers behind customers' decisions to purchase from Pivot3. So what I would say is that absolutely we are seeing investment, and we are seeing that, at least based on the customers that we've spoken with, these services and support capabilities are meeting customers' requirements as they're migrating to this new architecture.
Thank you for that, Krista. And this question is for Bruce. When will the quality of service feature be available on Pivot3 appliances?
Oh, great question. So what that person's referring to is the quality of service capability that came with the merger with NextGen Storage. They had probably the most advanced quality of service dynamic provisioning capability in the market for storage arrays, all-flash storage arrays and hybrid. We are adapting that to the overall Hyperconverged stack. So it's available today in our first truly joint product that combines the best of both NextGen and Pivot3. That's called the SLX. It's available today. That manages the quality of service for applications that depend on the storage part of that array. We will be extending that to the broader set of resources, the memory, the storage, the networking, over the next 2 releases, the first of which comes at the end of this year. So in the the foreseeable future, in the next couple of months.
Okay, great. That wraps up.
Stacy.
Oh, go ahead.
Stacy, yeah, I also misspoke on my last response. I had said that we scale to multiple terabytes, but we do in fact scale to multiple petabytes. So the 6 and 10 petabyte implementations I referred to earlier are probably the largest in the industry, and that's been reported by a couple of the analyst firms that have done those investigations.
Thanks for clarifying that, Bruce. We did just have another question come in. So we're interested in reducing our traditional storage footprint and VMware licensing costs. How can Hyperconvergence help with this?
Sure. So this is Krista. Bruce, I'm not sure if you wanted to kick that off or if you'd like me to give some overall thoughts.
Well, I'm happy to contribute. I mean, first of all, to reduce your VMware licensing cost, you have to reduce the number of VMs you're deploying. We tend to get more density and more throughput out of a single VM, so you're going to reduce the number of VMs that are required, presuming that you are still planning to use VMware as your basic virtualization platform. We integrate completely with that, of course, and allow you to transition very quickly to Hyperconvergence while still taking advantage of all the skills you've developed around VMware. So more throughput, more density, more efficient use of the VMs that you do deploy would be, the promise of deploying Hyperconvergence to reduce your storage requirements, storage infrastructure requirements.
Yeah, and I think that those are all excellent points, Bruce, and I think the only other additional comments that I would make would be that, we have seen that customers are turning to Hyperconverged to be able to sort of control those software licensing costs, and also from the perspective of the storage footprint, because there are capabilities like disaster recovery that tend to be built in, pre-integrated with the Hyperconverged deployment, we are seeing that the storage footprint tends to be dramatically reduced for customers. And in fact, in some cases, we've spoken with some customers that were able to really set up a disaster recovery implementation where before they wouldn't be able to. So yeah, those would just be the other comments that I would add.
Yeah,
Okay,
without things like scalar erasure coding, it wouldn't actually be practical to set up, a business continuity, disaster recovery, backup scenario for a 100 petabyte deployment, for instance, where erasure coding actually allows you to do that and spread the, stripe the data across multiple nodes and take an arithmetic derivation of the data as opposed to having a one-to-one replication of it, or in fact, a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 replication of it. So that can reduce your storage infrastructure requirements significantly. So that's a very good point, Krista.
All right, we do have a couple more questions, but they're about specific scenarios. So we'll go ahead and answer those offline after the webinar so we can give you specifics on what you're asking about. If you have any questions for us after the webinar, the contact information for both TBR and Pivot3 is right there on your screen. Feel free to reach out to us. We will be sending out a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the slide deck to your inbox tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in learning more about hyperconverged solutions or Pivot3, you can visit us at pivot3.com. That wraps it up for today. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Stacy. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.